The bridge of the UES Tenacity hummed with nervous energy as Captain Sarah Chen stared at the tactical display. Red dots swarmed across the holographic representation of the Kepler 442 system, each one representing a Vorthak battleship. The alien armada stretched across 3 million kilometers of space, their sleek black vessels moving in perfect formation like a school of predatory fish. "Ma'am, we're receiving another surrender demand from the Vorthak fleet commander," reported Lieutenant Torres from the communications station. His voice carried the weight of exhaustion that had settled over the entire crew after 6 months of running battles across the outer rim. Sarah's jaw tightened. The Galactic Defense Coalition had been losing this war from the moment it started. The Vorthak Empire had swept through 12 systems in as many weeks, their advanced technology making short work of any resistance. Every species that had joined the coalition brought their best ships and their finest warriors, but it hadn't been enough. The reptilian Vorthak had weapons that could punch through shields like paper and armor, that seemed to shrug off even the most powerful energy blasts. "How many ships do we have left in our fleet?" Sarah asked, though she already knew the answer would be grim. Commander Yuki Nakamura, her first officer, consulted his tablet with grim efficiency. 43 vessels still combat capable, Captain. We lost the Arcturus battle group 2 hours ago, when they tried to break through the Vorthak right flank. The Zolonian cruiser squadron is down to 3 ships, and the Proximan fighters are running low on fuel cells. Sarah nodded slowly, her mind racing through possibilities that all seemed to lead to the same conclusion. The coalition fleet had been outgunned and outmaneuvered at every turn. The Vorthak didn't just have superior technology. They had superior numbers, superior strategy, and what seemed like an infinite supply of reinforcements streaming in from their core worlds. The Tenacity itself was humanity's newest and most advanced vessel, a testament to the rapid technological growth that had marked their entry into galactic civilization just 50 years ago. But even with its experimental quantum drive and adaptive armor systems, it was still just one ship against an empire that had conquered half the galaxy. "Captain, incoming transmission from Admiral Korath," Lieutenant Torres announced. "It's on the command frequency." Sarah straightened in her chair. Admiral Korath was the Zolonian officer commanding what remained of the coalition forces. His people had been among the first to fall to the Vorthak advance, and the few ships that escaped the destruction of their homeworld had been fighting a desperate rearguard action ever since. The main screen shimmered, revealing the weathered face of the Zolonian admiral. His blue-scaled skin bore the ritual scars of his warrior caste, and his golden eyes held the weight of a leader who had watched his people's civilization burn. "Captain Chen," Korath's voice carried the harmonics that marked his species' speech. "I'm transmitting the latest tactical analysis. The situation is challenging." Sarah suppressed a bitter laugh. Challenging was one way to put it. Hopeless might be more accurate. The Vorthak have positioned their main battle line to block any escape routes to the hyperspace jump points. Korath continued. "Their flanking forces are moving to envelope our position. At current rates of attrition, we have perhaps 6 hours before our combat effectiveness drops below critical thresholds." "What about reinforcements?" Sarah asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "The nearest coalition fleet is 3 days away, assuming they haven't been intercepted by Vorthak hunting packs. Captain, I must ask you to consider the welfare of your crew. The Vorthak have offered terms for surrender. Your people would be treated according to the Galactic conventions." Sarah felt the eyes of her bridge crew upon her. These men and women had volunteered for this mission knowing the odds. Humanity had only recently joined the Galactic community, and many species still viewed them as primitive newcomers. But the humans had insisted on contributing to the defense against the Vorthak threat, despite having only a handful of ships capable of interstellar combat. "Admiral, what's the status of the civilian evacuation ships?" Sarah asked. "The last transport convoy cleared the system 2 hours ago. All non-combatants have been successfully evacuated to the core worlds. The mission parameters have been fulfilled." That should have been good news, but Sarah found little comfort in it. The coalition had managed to evacuate millions of civilians from the border worlds, but at the cost of their entire military fleet. The Vorthak advance would continue, and there would be more worlds, more civilians, more desperate evacuations. "Captain," Commander Nakamura said quietly, "perhaps the Admiral is right. We've done our duty. The civilians are safe." Sarah turned to look at her first officer. Yuki had been with her since the Tenacity's maiden voyage, and she trusted his judgment implicitly. But something deep in her gut rebelled against the idea of surrender. Not because of pride or stubborn human nature, but because she had seen what happened to worlds under Vorthak occupation. The aliens might follow the technical letter of galactic law regarding prisoners, but they had their own ideas about what constituted acceptable treatment of conquered populations. "Ma'am," Lieutenant Torres interrupted, "I'm detecting movement in the Vorthak formation. It looks like they're preparing for a final assault." The tactical display updated, showing the massive alien fleet beginning to accelerate toward the Coalition's position, hundreds of ships moving with mechanical precision. Their formation designed to maximize firepower while minimizing their own losses. It was the kind of textbook military maneuver that had made the Vorthak Empire the dominant force in this galaxy. Sarah stood up from her command chair and walked to the forward viewport. The stars look so peaceful from here, tiny points of light scattered across the infinite darkness. It was hard to believe that somewhere out there, billions of beings were locked in a struggle that would determine the fate of entire civilizations. "Admiral Korath," she said finally, "I need 5 minutes to consult with my crew." "Of course, Captain, but I urge you not to delay too long. The Vorthak commander has been insistent about receiving our response." The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in tense silence. Sarah could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on her shoulders. Surrender meant survival for her crew, but it also meant accepting defeat in a war that would determine whether dozens of species would remain free or become subjects of the Vorthak Empire. But as she stared out at the stars, a crazy idea began to form in the back of her mind. Sarah turned away from the viewport and faced her bridge crew. These people had followed her through 6 months of running battles, had trusted her judgment when other commanders fell to Vorthak tactics, and had never once questioned her decisions even when the odds seemed impossible. Now she was about to ask them to trust her one more time. "Commander Nakamura, pull up the technical specifications for our quantum drive," she said, moving back to her command chair with sudden purpose. Yuki's brow furrowed in confusion, but he complied without question. The holographic display shifted to show the complex schematics of the Tenacity's most advanced system. The quantum drive was humanity's greatest technological achievement, a breakthrough that had allowed them to join the galactic community in the first place. Unlike the hyperspace drives used by other species, the quantum drive could manipulate spacetime itself, creating temporary rifts in reality that allowed for near-instantaneous travel. "Ma'am, are you thinking of making a run for it?" asked Lieutenant Commander Parks from the engineering station. "The Vorthak have the jump points covered, but we might be able to punch through their line if we—" "No," Sarah interrupted, her voice taking on a tone that made everyone on the bridge pay attention. "I'm thinking of something much more dangerous." She walked over to the tactical display, studying the positioning of the Vorthak fleet. The aliens had arranged themselves in a classic envelopment formation, with their heavy battleships forming the center line and lighter vessels extending out on both flanks. It was a formation designed to prevent escape and maximize their firepower advantage. "Torres, I need you to run a calculation for me," Sarah said. "If we were to overload our quantum drive core, what would be the maximum energy release?" The young lieutenant's face went pale. "Captain, overloading the quantum drive would be suicide. The energy release would vaporize everything within—" He stopped mid-sentence as understanding dawned in his eyes. "Oh, run the calculation," Sarah repeated firmly. Lieutenant Torres's fingers flew over his console, running complex equations through the ship's computer systems. The numbers that appeared on the screen made several crew members gasp audibly. "Captain," Torres said in a shaky voice, "a quantum drive overload would release approximately 10 to the 15th joules of energy. The blast radius would extend roughly 50,000 kilometers in all directions." Commander Nakamura leaned forward in his chair. "That would take out at least a third of their fleet, maybe more if they maintain their current formation." "It would also take out us," pointed out Lieutenant Commander Parks, though her tone suggested she was beginning to understand the implications of what their captain was proposing. Sarah nodded grimly. "Yes, it would. But look at their formation again. The Vorthak have positioned their command vessels in the center of their battle line, probably because they think it's the safest position. Their fleet admiral is in one of those ships, along with their primary tactical coordination systems." The bridge fell silent as the crew absorbed what their captain was suggesting. It wasn't just a suicide mission. It was a desperate gambit that would trade one human ship and its crew for a chance to cripple the most powerful military force in the galaxy. Captain, Yuki said carefully, even if we could take out their command structure, the remaining ships would still outnumber the Coalition fleet by 3-1. They could still win this battle. Maybe, Sarah admitted. But without their central command, their coordination would break down. The Vorthak rely heavily on centralized tactical control. Individual ship commanders aren't trained to operate independently. They'd revert to standard defensive protocols, which means they'd consolidate their forces and wait for new orders from their home fleet. That could buy the Coalition time to regroup, Parks added, her engineering mind already working through the possibilities. Maybe even time for reinforcements to arrive. Sarah walked back to her command chair but didn't sit down. Instead, she activated the ship-wide communication system. All hands, this is the captain. I'm calling for a general assembly in the main hangar bay. All department heads and senior staff report immediately. This is not a drill. 20 minutes later, Sarah stood before the assembled crew of the UES Tenacity. 350 souls looked back at her, their faces reflecting the exhaustion and strain of months of warfare. These people had signed up to explore the galaxy, to represent humanity's hopes and dreams among the stars. None of them had expected to find themselves fighting for the very survival of galactic civilization. I'm going to be direct with you, Sarah began, her voice carrying clearly through the hangar bay's acoustic system. The Coalition fleet is going to lose this battle. The Vorthak have us outgunned, outnumbered, and outmaneuvered. Within hours, every ship in our fleet will be destroyed or forced to surrender. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, but Sarah held up a hand for silence. However, I believe there's a way we can still accomplish something meaningful. A way to give the Coalition a fighting chance in this war, even if we don't live to see the outcome. She explained her plan in detail, laying out the technical requirements and the tactical implications. She told them about the quantum drive overload, about the blast radius, about the potential to cripple the Vorthak command structure, and she told them about the cost. I want to be absolutely clear, she concluded. What I'm proposing is a suicide mission. If we do this, none of us are going home. Our families will never see us again, but our sacrifice might save billions of lives across dozens of worlds. The hangar bay fell silent. Sarah could see the emotions playing across the faces of her crew. Fear, determination, resignation, and something that might have been pride. Chief Petty Officer Martinez, the senior enlisted man aboard the ship, stepped forward. Captain, permission to speak freely? Granted, Chief. Ma'am, I've been in the service for 23 years. I've seen good commanders and bad ones, and I've learned to tell the difference. You're asking us to die for something bigger than ourselves, and that's never an easy thing. But I've watched you lead this crew for the past year, and I've seen how you care about every person on this ship. If you think this is the right thing to do, then I'm with you. Other voices began to speak up from the crowd. Engineering specialist Wong volunteered to help with the technical modifications needed for the quantum drive overload. Navigator Chen offered to plot the optimal approach vector. Medical Officer Patel quietly stated that she would remain at her post to care for anyone injured during the mission. One by one, the crew of the Tenacity stepped forward to volunteer for a mission they knew would be their last. Not because they were ordered to, but because they understood what was at stake. They had seen the reports from occupied worlds, had witnessed the systematic brutality of the Vorthak Empire, and had chosen to stand against it. As Sarah watched her crew volunteer for certain death, she felt a profound mixture of pride and sorrow. These people exemplified the best of humanity, their willingness to sacrifice everything for a chance to protect others, their refusal to give up even when facing impossible odds. Thank you, she said simply. All of you. Now let's get to work. The engineering deck of the Tenacity had been transformed into a controlled chaos of sparking consoles and exposed quantum conduits. Chief Engineer Rebecca Santos wiped sweat from her forehead as she supervised the delicate process of modifying the ship's quantum drive core. The modifications required to create a controlled overload were incredibly dangerous, with one wrong calculation potentially triggering premature detonation. Careful with that quantum resonance chamber, Santos called out to Petty Officer Kim, who was carefully removing safety interlocks from the drive's primary containment system. If that field destabilizes before we're ready, We'll blow ourselves apart before we even reach the Vorthak fleet. Captain Chen stood in the engineering section's observation deck, watching her crew work with grim determination. The technical challenges were immense. The quantum drive had been designed with multiple redundant safety systems specifically to prevent the kind of catastrophic failure they were now deliberately trying to create. How? Long until the modifications are complete? Sarah asked through the intercom. Santos looked up from her diagnostic panel. Another 40 minutes, Captain. Maybe 35 if everything goes perfectly, which is optimistic given what we're attempting. And the blast timing? Once we initiate the overload sequence, we'll have approximately 8 minutes before the quantum field collapses completely. The initial energy release will begin about 30 seconds before total collapse, so we need to be in position and ready to transmit our message before then. Sarah nodded and activated her personal communicator. Commander Nakamura, report to my ready room. Yuki arrived within minutes carrying a data tablet filled with tactical projections and approach vectors. His usually calm demeanor showed signs of strain as the weight of their mission settled over the entire crew. What's our status with the Coalition fleet? Sarah asked as soon as the door closed behind him. Admiral Korath is growing impatient, Yuki replied. The Vorthak commander has extended the surrender deadline twice, but they're clearly preparing for a final assault. Our tactical analysis suggests they'll begin their attack run within the next hour, whether we surrender or not. Sarah studied the star charts spread across her desk. The Kepler 442 system had been chosen as the Coalition's fallback position because its asteroid fields and radiation storms provided some tactical advantages. But those same features that offered concealment also limited their escape routes. Have you calculated our optimal approach vector? She asked. Yes, but it's going to be tricky. Yuki activated the holographic display, showing the complex orbital mechanics of the system. We'll need to use the asteroid field for cover during our initial approach, then break into open space for the final run. The Vorthak will detect us the moment we clear the asteroids, which gives us maybe 4 minutes before they can bring their main guns to bear. 4 minutes to cover 50,000 kilometers and get within optimal blast radius, Sarah mused. That's cutting it very close. There's another complication, Yuki continued reluctantly. The quantum drive modifications will leave us effectively defenseless. We won't have power for shields or weapons during the approach. If the Vorthak concentrate their fire on us, we'll be destroyed before we can complete the mission, Sarah finished. Which means we need a distraction. Both officers fell silent as they considered the implications. The plan required the tenacity to reach the center of the Vorthak formation without being destroyed by enemy fire, but a single ship, even one moving at maximum speed, would be an easy target for hundreds of alien warships. Captain, Yuki said slowly, what if we convince the Coalition fleet to launch a diversionary attack? If they could draw Vorthak attention away from our approach vector, that would be asking them to sacrifice themselves for our mission, Sarah pointed out. And Admiral Korath has already made it clear that he's considering surrender to save his remaining crews. Maybe that's exactly why he'd agree to it, Yuki suggested. One final attack to cover our approach. Even if the Coalition ships are destroyed, it would be a military action rather than simple surrender. There's honor in that, especially for species like the Zolonians. Sarah considered the idea carefully. It would indeed require the remaining Coalition forces to sacrifice themselves, but it might be their only chance to strike a meaningful blow against the Vorthak Empire. And if the mission succeeded, their sacrifice could change the entire course of the war. Set up a secure communication channel with Admiral Korath, she decided. Full encryption, command-level authorization. The Admiral's response came through 20 minutes later. His scaled features looked even more weathered than before, and Sarah could see the weight of command wearing on him as he faced the destruction of everything he had sworn to protect. Captain Chen, Korath's harmonics carried undertones of exhaustion and resignation. I trust you have reached a decision regarding surrender? Admiral, I have a proposal that you're not going to like, Sarah said directly. But it might be our only chance to accomplish something meaningful before this fleet is destroyed. She outlined her plan in detail, explaining the quantum drive overload and its potential to cripple the Vorthak command structure. She told him about the diversionary attack needed to get the tenacity into position, and about the certain death that awaited everyone involved. Admiral Korath listened in silence, his golden eyes never leaving the screen. When Sarah finished, he was quiet for a long moment before responding. Captain, what you are proposing is tactically sound but strategically desperate. You are asking me to order the deaths of every remaining coalition warrior for a chance that may not even succeed. Yes, sir, I am, Sarah replied honestly. Because the alternative is surrender, and we both know what happens to occupied worlds under Vorthak rule. The Zilonian admiral's features shifted, and what Sarah had learned was their equivalent of a grimace. His people had been among the first to experience Vorthak occupation, and the reports from their homeworld painted a grim picture of systematic oppression and cultural destruction. There is something you should know, Captain, Korath said finally. 3 hours ago, we received a transmission from the core worlds. The Vorthak have issued an ultimatum to the Galactic Council. Complete surrender within 10 standard days, or they will begin systematic orbital bombardment of inhabited planets. Sarah felt her blood run cold. The implications were staggering. The Vorthak weren't just conquering territory. They were preparing to commit genocide on an unprecedented scale. How long until they reach the core worlds? She asked. At their current rate of advance, approximately 15 days. But if they eliminate this fleet and secure their supply lines through this system, they could accelerate their timeline significantly. The weight of the decision pressed down on both commanders. They were no longer just discussing the fate of their crews, but potentially the survival of galactic civilization itself. Admiral, Sarah said quietly, I can't order you to sacrifice your people for this mission, but I believe it's our only chance to buy the galaxy time to organize a real defense. Korath's image flickered slightly as the communication array adjusted for interference from the system's radiation storms. When the picture stabilized, Sarah could see something new in the alien commander's expression. Not just resignation, but a kind of fierce determination. Captain Chen, the Zilonian warrior code speaks of the final duty of a commander whose forces face inevitable defeat. That duty is to ensure that his warriors' deaths serve a purpose greater than themselves. He paused, and when he continued, his voice carried the weight of absolute conviction. I will order the diversionary attack. My ships will draw Vorthak fire away from your approach vector. We will give you the time you need to reach their command vessels. Thank you, Admiral, Sarah said simply. Do not thank me yet, Captain. Make sure their sacrifice means something. The bridge of the Tenacity hummed with unusual energy signatures as the modified quantum drive came online. Warning lights flashed across multiple consoles, and the familiar steady vibration of the ship's engines had taken on an irregular, almost frantic rhythm. The modifications to create a controlled overload had fundamentally altered the way the ship operated, turning their most advanced system into a carefully contained bomb. Engineering reports all modifications complete. Captain, Lieutenant Commander Parks announced from her station, the quantum drive is operating within acceptable parameters for our purposes, but I have to stress that these parameters include eventual catastrophic failure. Sarah nodded grimly as she studied the tactical display. The Vorthak fleet had begun moving into their final attack formation, their massive ships arranging themselves into the killing formation that had destroyed coalition forces across a dozen systems. At the center of their battle line, she could see the distinctive silhouette of their command dreadnought, a vessel 3 times the size of any coalition ship, bristling with weapons and sensor arrays. Communications. Patch me through to the fleet, Sarah ordered. Aye, Captain. You're connected to all coalition vessels. Sarah activated the general fleet channel, knowing that this would likely be the last time she spoke to the brave crews who had fought alongside her for months. All coalition vessels. This is Captain Chen of the UES Tenacity. In approximately 10 minutes, we will begin our final operation against the Vorthak fleet. Admiral Korath will coordinate the diversionary attack from his flagship. I want every ship captain to know that what we're about to do will be remembered long after this war is over. Your courage and sacrifice will echo across the galaxy. She paused, looking around at her own bridge crew. These people had volunteered for certain death, and their calm professionalism in the face of that knowledge filled her with fierce pride. To the crew of the Tenacity, she continued, it has been the greatest honor of my life to serve alongside you. Whatever happens next, know that you are the finest people I have ever known. Captain, Lieutenant Torres interrupted softly. Incoming transmission from Earth Fleet Command. Priority Alpha encryption. Sarah felt her heart skip a beat. Communications from Earth took weeks to reach this far into the outer rim. which meant this message had been sent long before the current crisis began. But Priority Alpha meant it contained information critical to humanity's survival. On screen, she ordered. The image that appeared showed Admiral Harrison, the gruff old spacer who commanded humanity's small but growing space fleet. His weathered face bore an expression Sarah had never seen before, a mixture of pride and profound sadness. "Captain Chen," the recording began, "if you are receiving this message, then the situation in the Kepler 442 system has become critical. Intelligence reports suggest that the Vorthak are massing forces for what may be their final push toward the core worlds." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. The message had been sent 3 weeks ago, but Admiral Harrison's predictions had proven eerily accurate. "I want you to know that your efforts have not gone unnoticed," the Admiral continued. "The civilian evacuation operations you've supported have saved over 40 million lives. More importantly, your tactical reports have provided us with crucial intelligence about Vorthak capabilities and weaknesses." The Admiral paused, and when he resumed speaking, his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "Captain, I'm hereby granting you full operational discretion regarding the defense of the Kepler 442 system. If circumstances require extraordinary measures, you are authorized to take whatever actions you deem necessary to protect coalition interests." Sarah realized she was holding her breath. Admiral Harrison was essentially giving her carte blanche to do whatever she thought best, regardless of standard protocols or military regulations. "One final thing. Captain," the Admiral said, and now his expression softened slightly. "Tell your crew that Earth is proud of them. Whatever happens out there, they represent the very best of humanity." The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in contemplative silence. Sarah felt a moment of overwhelming emotion as she realized that Admiral Harrison had somehow anticipated this exact situation. He had known that she might be forced to make an impossible choice, and he had given her the authority to make it. "Captain," Commander Nakamura said quietly, "the Vorthak fleet is beginning their final approach. Admiral Korath is requesting confirmation for the diversionary attack." Sarah straightened in her command chair and pushed aside her emotions. There would be time for grief later if there was a later. Right now she had a mission to complete. "Tell Admiral Korath that we are ready," she ordered. "All stations prepare for combat acceleration." The next few minutes passed in a blur of activity as the coalition fleet prepared for its final battle. On the tactical display, Sarah watched as the remaining 43 coalition ships began moving into attack formation. They were hopelessly outnumbered, but they moved with the precision and determination of warriors who had accepted their fate. "Admiral Korath to all coalition vessels," the Zilonian commander's voice echoed across the fleet channel. "Today we fight not for victory, but for the future of free worlds everywhere. Our sacrifice will light a fire that burns across the galaxy. For our fallen comrades, for our lost worlds, for those who will come after us, attack." The coalition fleet surged forward in a desperate assault against the Vorthak battle line. Despite being vastly outnumbered, they fought with the fury of those who had nothing left to lose. Zilonian cruisers unleashed everything they had at the alien dreadnoughts, while Proximan fighters swarmed around the edges of the Vorthak formation in suicidal attack runs. "Now," Sarah ordered, "take us into the asteroid field." The Tenacity dropped away from the main battle and slipped between the rocky debris that filled this part of the system. Navigation through the asteroid field required split-second timing and precise maneuvering, but it provided crucial concealment as they began their approach toward the Vorthak command ships. "Engineering. What's our status on the quantum drive?" Sarah asked. "Running hot but stable," Santos reported. "The overload sequence will be ready to initiate on your command, but remember, once we start the process, there's no stopping it." Sarah nodded and focused on the tactical display. The diversionary attack was working better than she had dared hope. The Vorthak fleet had turned most of their attention toward the coalition assault, their massive ships forming defensive clusters to concentrate their firepower. It was exactly the kind of predictable response that Sarah had been counting on. "Captain," Lieutenant Torres called out, "I'm detecting increased chatter on Vorthak command frequencies. It sounds like they're calling for reinforcements from their reserve squadrons. How long until those reinforcements arrive?" "Approximately 15 minutes if they're coming from the outer system pickets." Sarah did quick mental calculations. They would be long dead by then, one way or another. The only question was whether they could complete their mission before the Vorthak realized what was happening. "Clear the asteroid field in 30 seconds, Navigator Chen announced. "Recommend we go to maximum acceleration as soon as we reach open space." Acknowledged. "All hands prepare for emergency acceleration." The Tenacity burst from the asteroid field like a missile, its quantum drive pushing the ship to velocities that strained the inertial compensators. Behind them, the Coalition fleet continued their desperate assault, selling their lives to buy precious seconds for the human ship's approach. "Vorthak sensors have detected us," Torres reported. "Multiple enemy ships are breaking off from the main engagement." Sarah watched as red icons began moving across the tactical display toward their position. The Vorthak had realized that something was wrong, but it might already be too late to stop them. "Distance to target?" she asked. 60,000 kilometers in closing, Nakamura replied. "We're within optimal blast radius." Sarah took a deep breath and made the decision that would define the rest of their very short lives. "Engineering, initiate quantum drive overload sequence." "All hands, this is the captain. 8 minutes until detonation." The moment the quantum drive overload sequence began, every system on the Tenacity started displaying warnings. The ship's computer, designed to prevent exactly this kind of catastrophic failure, fought against the modifications even as energy levels climbed beyond all safety parameters. In the engineering section, Chief Santos watched her instruments with grim fascination, as forces normally contained within quantum fields began to leak into normal space-time. "Overload sequence initiated," Santos reported over the ship-wide communication system. "Energy cascade is building within expected parameters. 7 minutes and 30 seconds to total field collapse." On the bridge, Sarah watched the tactical display as Vorthak ships began converging on their position. The alien vessels moved with deadly precision, their commanders clearly understanding that something unprecedented was happening. Energy beams lanced through space as the nearest Vorthak ships opened fire, but the Tenacity's desperate acceleration kept them just ahead of the targeting solutions. "Multiple enemy vessels closing on our position," Torres announced, his voice steady, despite the chaos erupting around them. "At least 12 ships have broken off from the main battle to intercept us." "Can we reach the command dreadnought before they destroy us?" Sarah asked. Commander Nakamura ran rapid calculations on his tactical computer. "It's going to be close, Captain. We need another 3 minutes to reach optimal position, but the Vorthak will be in weapons range in 90 seconds. The bridge shook violently as the first enemy weapons found their mark. Without power diverted to shields, the Tenacity's armor plating absorbed the full force of the Vorthak energy beams. Warning lights flashed across multiple consoles as hull breaches appeared on the damage control displays. "Hull breach on Deck 7, Lieutenant Commander Parks reported. "Emergency bulkheads are holding, but we can't take much more of this." Sarah gripped her command chair as another barrage struck the ship. Through the main viewport, she could see the massive bulk of the Vorthak command dreadnought growing larger as they approached. The alien vessel was a monument to military engineering, its black hull bristling with weapons that could reduce planets to rubble. Somewhere inside that ship was the fleet commander whose death might change the course of the war. "Captain," Torres called out urgently, "I'm receiving a transmission from the Vorthak command ship. They're demanding we cease acceleration and prepare to be boarded." "Ignore it," Sarah ordered. "Continue on course." The bombardment intensified as more Vorthak ships joined the attack. The Tenacity's hull groaned under the assault, and sparks flew from overloaded systems across the bridge. But the human ship continued its relentless approach, powered by the same quantum drive that would soon tear it apart. 6 minutes to detonation, Santos announced. "Captain, the quantum field is becoming increasingly unstable. If we take much more damage, the overload could happen prematurely." Sarah nodded grimly. They were walking a tightrope between destruction by enemy fire and premature detonation of their own weapon. Either outcome would mean failure of the mission and the deaths of millions of innocent beings across the galaxy. "Distance to target?" she asked. 40,000 kilometers, Nakamura replied. "We're getting close to optimal position." Through the chaos of battle, Sarah could see the Coalition fleet still fighting their desperate rearguard action. Admiral Korath's flagship, badly damaged but still firing, had positioned itself between the main Vorthak force and the Tenacity's approach vector. The Zolonian commander was sacrificing what remained of his fleet to buy them precious seconds. "Captain," Torres said suddenly, "I'm detecting something odd on the Vorthak command frequencies. It sounds like they're evacuating non-essential personnel from their command ships." Sarah felt a surge of grim satisfaction. The Vorthak had figured out what the Tenacity was trying to do, but their realization had come too late. Their command structure was already beginning to panic, which meant their tactical coordination would start breaking down within minutes. "They know," Sarah said simply. "They understand what we're doing, but they can't stop us now." The ship shuddered again as another Vorthak salvo found its mark. This time, the damage was more severe. Emergency lighting flickered on across the bridge as primary power systems began failing. The tactical display showed multiple hull breaches and system failures spreading throughout the ship. 5 minutes. "To detonation," Santos reported, though her voice was strained now. "Captain, I'm reading massive energy fluctuations in the quantum matrix. The containment field is starting to destabilize." "How long do we have before it fails completely?" Sarah asked. "Maybe 2 minutes, maybe less. The quantum field is interacting with the damage to our hull in ways I've never seen before." Sarah realized they were facing a new problem. If the quantum drive failed prematurely, they might not have enough energy for the massive explosion needed to destroy the Vorthak command structure. But if they tried to get closer to ensure maximum damage, they risked being destroyed by enemy fire before they could complete the mission. "Navigator, what's our current distance to the command dreadnought?" she asked. 35,000 kilometers and closing, Chen reported. "We're within the blast radius, but barely." Sarah made a snap decision that would determine whether their sacrifice had any meaning. "All remaining power to engines. Get us as close as possible to that command ship." The Tenacity surged forward with its last reserves of power, racing toward the massive Vorthak dreadnought even as enemy fire tore through its hull. The bridge, crew worked with desperate efficiency, knowing that every second brought them closer to both their target and their death. 4 minutes to detonation, Santos announced. "Captain, the quantum field is becoming critical. I don't think we can maintain containment much longer." 30,000 kilometers, Chen reported. "We're deep inside their formation now." Sarah looked around at her bridge crew one last time. These people had followed her into certain death without hesitation, had trusted her judgment even when it led to their destruction. They deserved to know that their sacrifice would mean something. "Torres, open a channel to Earth Fleet Command," she ordered. "Captain, at this distance any transmission will take weeks to reach Earth," Torres protested. "Open the channel anyway." Torres complied, and Sarah activated the ship's emergency beacon. The message would carry their final battle report across the galaxy, telling the story of what had happened here and how a single human ship had struck a blow against the Vorthak Empire. "Earth Fleet Command, this is Captain Sarah Chen of the UES Tenacity," she began, her voice calm despite the chaos around her. "We are transmitting our final battle report from the Kepler 442 system. At approximately 1347 hours Galactic Standard Time, we initiated a quantum drive overload attack against the Vorthak command fleet. The ship shook violently as another barrage struck their damaged hull. Sparks flew from multiple consoles and the lights flickered ominously. The coalition fleet under Admiral Korath has fought with extraordinary courage, sacrificing themselves to ensure our mission could succeed. If our calculations are correct, the destruction of the Vorthak command structure should disrupt their tactical coordination and buy the galaxy time to organize a proper defense." 3 minutes to detonation, Santos called out. "Captain, we need to prepare for final field collapse." 25,000 kilometers to target, Chen added. "We're in the heart of their formation now." Sarah continued her message, knowing it might be the last communication Earth ever received from their first deep space exploration vessel. "To the families of the Tenacity crew, know that your loved ones died as heroes. They chose to sacrifice everything to protect the freedom of countless worlds they would never see." "Captain," Torres interrupted urgently, "the Vorthak command ship is trying to retreat. They're attempting to break away from their formation." Sarah looked at the tactical display and saw that the massive dreadnought was indeed beginning to move, its engines flaring as it tried to escape the approaching explosion. But the alien ship was too large and too slow to outrun what was coming. "It won't matter," she said calmly. "They can't escape the blast radius in time." 2 minutes to detonation, Santos announced. "All hands, prepare for quantum field collapse." The Tenacity continued its death ride toward the heart of the Vorthak fleet, its crew counting down the final moments of their lives with grim determination. Around them, the most powerful military force in the galaxy scrambled desperately to avoid the catastrophe they had unleashed. But it was already too late to stop what the humans had set in motion. The final minute aboard the UES Tenacity passed in a strange state of calm acceptance. The bridge crew remained at their stations, monitoring systems that would soon cease to exist, carrying out their duties with the same professionalism they had shown throughout their service. Emergency lighting cast everything in an eerie red glow as primary power systems failed one by one. 60 seconds to quantum field collapse, Chief Santos reported from engineering. Her voice carried across the ship's communication system with steady determination. All departments report ready for final operations. Captain Chen stood beside her command chair, watching the tactical display as the Vorthak fleet frantically tried to reorganize around the threat, bearing down on their command structure. Individual ships were breaking formation, some trying to interpose themselves between the Tenacity and their command vessels, others simply fleeing in panic as they realized what was about to happen. 15,000 kilometers to the command dreadnought, Navigator Chen announced. "We're as close as we're going to get." Sarah nodded and activated her personal log for the final time. Captain's log final entry. The crew of the UES Tenacity has performed beyond all expectations. In our darkest hour, when faced with impossible odds, they chose to stand against tyranny and oppression. Their courage will echo across the stars long after we are gone. 30 seconds, Santos called out. Quantum containment field reaching critical instability. The ship around them began to vibrate with frequencies that seemed to penetrate to the cellular level. The quantum drive was no longer just a propulsion system. It had become a weapon unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Energy readings climbed beyond the scales of their instruments as reality itself began to warp around the failing containment field. All coalition vessels, "This is Captain Chen," Sarah broadcast on the fleet frequency. "Clear the blast radius immediately. Repeat, all ships clear the blast radius now." On the tactical display, she could see the few remaining coalition ships desperately accelerating away from the Tenacity's position. Admiral Korath's damaged flagship was among them, its engines straining to reach minimum safe distance before the detonation. 20 seconds, Santos announced. Field collapse is now inevitable. Sarah felt a moment of profound peace settle over her. The fear and uncertainty that had plagued her for months suddenly seemed insignificant, compared to the knowledge that their sacrifice would save countless lives. The crew of the Tenacity had faced the ultimate test of courage, and they had not been found wanting. 10 seconds, Santos called out. "It's been an honor serving with you all." The bridge fell silent except for the increasingly frantic vibrations of the failing quantum drive. Sarah looked around at her officers one final time, seeing in their faces the same calm acceptance that filled her own heart. They had done everything possible to complete their mission, and now their fate was in the hands of physics and destiny. 5 seconds, Santos whispered. Quantum field collapse imminent. The universe held its breath for an infinitesimal moment as the quantum containment field finally failed completely. Then space-time itself screamed in protest as energies normally confined to the heart of stars erupted in a sphere of pure destruction that expanded at a significant fraction of the speed of light. The explosion was visible from 3 star systems away. When the initial blast cleared, a sphere of empty space 50,000 kilometers in diameter marked where the center of the Vorthak fleet had been. 37 alien warships, including their massive command dreadnought, had been instantly vaporized by the quantum detonation. The remaining Vorthak vessels, scattered and disorganized, drifted in space like leaves after a hurricane. Admiral Korath's flagship, battered but still functional, had barely escaped the blast radius. The Zolonian commander stood on his bridge, staring at the readings that told the story of what the humans had accomplished. In a single devastating moment, they had destroyed nearly half of the Vorthak invasion fleet and eliminated their entire command structure. "Communications officer," Korath said quietly, broadcast a message to all remaining Vorthak vessels. Inform them that the Coalition fleet demands their immediate surrender. The response came within minutes. Without their fleet admiral and tactical coordination computers, the surviving Vorthak ship commanders reverted to their species' ingrained defensive protocols. One by one, they powered down their weapons and submitted to Coalition authority. The battle for the Kepler 442 system was over. 3 days later, the first reports of the victory reached the core worlds of the galaxy. The destruction of the Vorthak invasion fleet had shattered their carefully planned offensive and thrown their empire into chaos. Without their central command structure, individual Vorthak sectors began fighting among themselves, competing for the right to succeed the fallen fleet admiral. The systematic advance that had seemed unstoppable just days before ground to a halt as the Vorthak empire turned inward, consumed by internal power struggles that would last for years. The threat of orbital bombardment against civilian populations evaporated as competing Vorthak factions focused their attention on destroying each other rather than conquering new territory. But the real impact of the Tenacity's sacrifice went far beyond military considerations. Across the galaxy, species that had been preparing for defeat suddenly found themselves filled with hope. The humans, the newest members of the galactic community, had shown that the Vorthak Empire was not invincible. They had proven that courage and determination could triumph over superior technology and overwhelming odds. Within weeks, new volunteers began enlisting in coalition forces. The Zolonians, whose homeworld had been among the first to fall, launched a successful rebellion that liberated 3 occupied systems. The Proximans, inspired by human example, developed new fighting tactics that turned their light fighters into devastating weapons against Vorthak capital ships. Most importantly, the galaxy's greatest scientific minds began working together to develop new technologies based on human quantum drive principles. The weapons that had seemed so advanced in Vorthak hands suddenly appeared, primitive compared to the destructive potential of controlled quantum field manipulation. The war that had seemed lost just days before became a crusade for liberation, with the sacrifice of the UES Tenacity serving as a rallying cry that united dozens of species in common cause. The Vorthak Empire, once the galaxy's undisputed superpower, found itself fighting a desperate defensive war against enemies who no longer feared their supposedly invincible technology. In the end, historians would mark the destruction of the Tenacity as the turning point in the galactic war of liberation. A single human ship and its crew of 350 volunteers had changed the fate of billions of beings across thousands of worlds, proving that even in the darkest times the courage of the few could light the way for the many. 5 years after the destruction of the UES Tenacity, Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood before the assembled representatives of the Galactic Council on the crystal world of Zephyria. The massive chamber, carved from a single enormous geode, amplified her voice as she prepared to deliver humanity's address to the most important gathering in galactic history. Around her sat delegates from 47 different species, many of whom had only recently thrown off the chains of Vorthak occupation. The war that had seemed hopeless just years before was finally drawing to a close, with the last Vorthak strongholds falling to coalition forces equipped with quantum-enhanced weapons developed from captured Tenacity technology. Honored delegates, Elena began, her words carrying across the crystalline chamber. We gather today not to celebrate conquest, but to remember sacrifice. The war that brought us together has ended, but the lessons we learned must never be forgotten. In the front row of the assembly, Admiral Korath sat with the other military commanders who had survived the long conflict. The Zolonian officer bore new scars from the battles that had liberated his homeworld, but his golden eyes held a light that had been absent during those dark days in the Kepler 442 system. The crew of the UES Tenacity faced a choice that no one should ever have to make, Elena continued. They could have surrendered, could have saved their own lives and trusted that somehow the galaxy would find another way to resist the Vorthak Empire. Instead, they chose to sacrifice everything for the chance to give the rest of us hope. Behind Elena, a holographic display showed images from the final battle. The footage recovered from Admiral Korath's flagship captured the moment when the Tenacity made its death run toward the Vorthak command fleet. The images were silent, but everyone in the chamber had heard the recordings of Captain Chen's final messages. But their sacrifice was not just about military victory, Elena said, her voice growing stronger. It was about proving that freedom is worth any price, that tyranny can be defeated when beings of conscience choose to stand together regardless of the cost. The assembly chamber fell silent as delegates reflected on the words. Many of them had lost friends and family members during the long years of war. Some had watched their homeworlds burn under Vorthak bombardment. Others had spent years in occupation, wondering if liberation would ever come. The quantum drive technology that gave us the weapons to win this war was originally designed for exploration, Elena explained. Humanity developed it to reach new stars, to discover new worlds, to expand the boundaries of knowledge and understanding. The fact that it became a weapon of war was never the intention, but sometimes tools of peace must be turned to purposes of defense. She paused, allowing her words to sink in before continuing with the most important part of her address. Today, the Galactic Council has the opportunity to ensure that such sacrifices are never again necessary. The peace treaty before you does more than end this war. It establishes principles that will govern how civilizations interact for generations to come. The treaty she referred to was unlike any diplomatic document in galactic history, forged in the crucible of war and shaped by the memory of those who had died for freedom. It established new standards for the treatment of conquered populations, created mechanisms for peaceful resolution of interstellar disputes, and most importantly, banned the use of quantum weapons against civilian targets. The Vorthak Empire has agreed to these terms not because they were defeated, but because their own people demanded change, Elena said. The courage shown by species like humanity and the Zilonians inspired rebellions within Vorthak space itself. Their civilian populations, seeing what freedom could accomplish, rose up against their own oppressive government. This was perhaps the most remarkable outcome of the war. The Vorthak Empire had not simply been defeated. It had been transformed from within. Inspired by the example of species willing to die for freedom, Vorthak civilians had demanded reforms that ultimately led to the overthrow of their militaristic leadership and the establishment of a more democratic society. The new Vorthak Republic has requested membership in the Galactic Coalition, Elena announced, causing a stir of surprise throughout the assembly. They wish to join the very organization their predecessors tried to destroy. Admiral Korath rose from his seat, his tall frame commanding attention as he spoke. Ambassador Vasquez speaks truly. I have met with the new Vorthak leadership, and I believe their commitment to peace is genuine. They understand that their survival depends on proving themselves worthy of trust. The Zilonian commander's endorsement carried tremendous weight. His people had suffered more than most under Vorthak rule, and his willingness to consider reconciliation spoke volumes about the possibility of lasting peace. But we must remember, Elena said, returning to the central theme of her address, that peace requires constant vigilance. The crew of the Tenacity died because the galaxy failed to recognize the threat of tyranny until it was almost too late. We must never again allow the forces of oppression to grow so strong that such desperate measures become necessary. She gestured toward the memorial wall that had been constructed as part of the chamber's recent renovation. Carved into crystal panels were the names of every being who had died fighting for freedom during the war. At the center, in letters that caught and reflected the chamber's light, were the names of the 350 crew members of the UES Tenacity. Captain Sarah Chen and her crew believed that the future of galactic civilization was worth their lives, Elena said. Today we have the opportunity to prove them right. The treaty before you represents everything they died for. A galaxy where different species can coexist in peace, where disputes are resolved through dialogue rather than warfare, where the strong protect the weak instead of exploiting them. The vote, when it came, was unanimous. Every delegate, including the representatives of the new Vorthak Republic, approved the treaty that would reshape galactic civilization. As they signed the historic document, many delegates paused to look up at the memorial wall, drawing inspiration from the names of those who had made this moment possible. After the ceremony, Elena stood alone in the chamber looking up at the names on the memorial wall. Tomorrow she would return to Earth to deliver the news that humanity's first venture into galactic politics had ended in success beyond anyone's wildest dreams. The small, relatively primitive species that had only recently learned to travel between stars had become one of the leading voices in galactic affairs. But tonight, she wanted to remember the cost of that success. 350 human beings had died to make this peace possible. Their names would be remembered as long as civilization endured, carved not just in crystal but in the foundation of a new era of galactic cooperation. As she prepared to leave, Elena noticed that she was not alone. Admiral Korath had remained behind, standing before the memorial wall with his head bowed in the Zolonian gesture of respect for the fallen. "They changed everything," the alien commander said softly. "Before the tenacity, we fought because we had no choice. After their sacrifice, we fought because we had hope." Elena nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. The crew of the UES Tenacity had not just won a battle or even a war. They had proven that courage and sacrifice could transform the galaxy itself, inspiring others to rise above their limitations and achieve something greater than themselves. Their names would be remembered forever, not just as heroes who died in battle, but as the symbols of everything that civilized beings could accomplish when they chose to stand together against the darkness. The human ship that won a galactic war had done something even more important than achieving military victory. It had shown the galaxy what it meant to be truly free.